Here on DZRJ 8:10 a.m. Radyo Bandido TV.
Watch and listen to Morning Report Pilipinas, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Airing on Sky Cable Channel 224 and on all DTT boxes. Simulcasting online on Facebook and YouTube. Listen and watch on your mobile devices. Just search DZRJ Radio Bandido. You are watching the multi-awarded Radio Bandido TV on Channel 224 Sky Cable and TV Plus boxes. Simulcast on DZRJ 8:10 a.m. Informing, advising, and entertaining the Filipinos and OFWs around the world. Streaming live on www.facebook.com/DZRJ 8:10 a.m. or on YouTube, channel DZRJ 8:10 a.m. Radio Bandido.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam here on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV. My name is Lecain, broadcasting here in the beautiful city of Makati. We bring you news stories going on around the world, interesting stuff that I think you might be interested in. This week, of course, we'll be looking at the Trump trips to the Middle East and that $400 million plane everyone's talking about. Some updates out of Israel and the endless war going on there. The P. Diddy trial that's finally underway. So we get you all caught up on that. And some updates on the tariffs, something that will soon find its way here in the Philippines. But before we get to the world news, I want to talk about something I think is really amazing. It's about a piece of music called Sky Islands. You see, it just won the Pulitzer Prize for music and was written by a very talented percussion composer named Suzy Ibarra. She's Filipino. Now, we've been talking on occasion about Filipinos from around the world doing incredible things. We're starting to see Filipinos winning more than just beauty contests, and this is a wonderful example of that. Actually, she's a Filipino-American born in California, both parents coming from the Philippines. She started piano at age 4 and continued in music, going to the famed Mannes School of Music in New York. Her pathway in music took her into jazz and drumming, where she began learning the sounds of the northern Philippines. She received an Asian Cultural Council Fellowship grant to research the indigenous and folkloric music of the Philippines. She recorded and filmed several endangered indigenous tribes in the Philippines. The piece Sky Islands, which draws attention to the Earth's biodiversity, changing climate, and global community practices, was inspired by the distant rainforest habitants in the northern Luzon area. It utilized the Philippines' northern style of bamboo, gong, and flute music. She received $15,000 for winning the Pulitzer Prize. But she will also go down in history as a person of Filipino descent to win the Pulitzer Prize for music. Now, I just want to reiterate just how big a deal this is. The number of Filipinos to ever win this can be counted on one hand. The first being in 1942, writing Far Eastern developments that were at the time of World War II, and another in 2004, for news photography and the war in Iraq, and others that all centered around just news. Of course, Maria Ressa, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for news reporting. But this would be the first one in the arts. First, it's amazing that she won, and second, that the story behind the music is just so inspiring and historical. This is a huge leap for the Philippine arts in the world. Now, I'm not Filipino, but I'm very proud to hear about such an accomplishment. Anyway, this is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam, talking about news going on around the world. So let's get things off and running with some Trump news. Well, Trump took his first trip abroad this week, and he went to the Middle East. Of course, the question everyone had was, is he going to broker a peace deal for the war going on in Israel? Well, not exactly, or rather no. He didn't really bring it up much. He went there with one thing on his mind: getting money and lots of free stuff. From the minute Trump touched on down on in his old Air Force One plane, which he doesn't seem to like anymore, he was met with glitz and glam. Previous president of the United States didn't get such a welcome as Trump because the Saudis know that this is how to get the president's ear. Have a red or purple carpets everywhere, have an escort of horses or camels, maybe some dancing girls. This is what really impresses Trump the most. But most importantly, there were no protests. In many places Trump goes in the U.S., he is always met with massive protests. They are constantly in front of the White House and in New York and in Florida, anywhere he goes in the U.S. This is why he can forget about going to all those places like Canada and the UK. It would be a security nightmare with all the protests. But in authoritarian nations like Saudi Arabia, not a single protest. Why? Because, well, if you protest, you could get easily executed. In fact, unlike previous presidents who visited the same place, Trump didn't really touch on human rights violations or women's rights or absence of democracy. When he met the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, he praised him as a great leader, saying, "How do you sleep at night? He's doing such a wonderful job that he has no time for sleep. He's done an amazing thing with his country." Has surprised all his critics. Now, many of those critics talk about the Crown Prince as a murderous dictator who ordered the killing of an American journalist, had him cut up with a bone saw before sneaking him out of the Saudi embassy in the trunk of a car, and he was never seen again. But Trump didn't mention any of that. In fact, he called Saudi Arabia the center of the world. He said going into this trip that the Prince of Saudi Arabia would be investing $1 trillion into the U.S. That this new era of having rich authoritarian friends was a really good thing for America. But $1 trillion is a lot. Even these days, where we keep tossing around the word trillion, it's a lot of cash to keep around, even if you are the Crown Prince. Now, according to multiple major news sources, it's actually too much money. That the Saudi Arabia doesn't have anywhere near that much money to spend, let alone give it all to the U.S. So later, the Crown Prince said he would actually be investing $600 billion, which is still a lot of money, but also an impossible number. The Saudis just don't have that much to invest. The sum of all their entire assets doesn't even equal to a figure of that amount. When Trump got to Saudi Arabia and was met with all those parades of horses, there were signs being held up that the country of Saudi Arabia would be investing $300 billion. But what was interesting is it turns out that those promotional signages were given to them by the United States. That's according to reports. Which starts people asking, okay, what is Trump really doing there? I mean, I remember when we reported here on the show years ago on a deal Trump had made to sell the Saudis $110 billion worth of equipment. It was a shocking announcement because the Crown Prince had just ordered the murder of an American citizen. But Trump pushed through anyway because, of course, the tens of thousands of new jobs it would create with the military weapons sector. In fact, he said it would bring 40,000 new jobs to the U.S., but then later it was 450,000 new jobs, and then 500,000, and then 600,000, and later he said it'd be bringing in over 1 million new jobs in the U.S. But in the end, the Saudis didn't purchase anywhere near the amount of weapons they claimed they were going to purchase. In fact, the big boost in jobs for military weapons never actually materialized. So again, why is Trump visiting there? Is he really there to bring in investment for the people of the U.S.? What are the Saudis really investing in? If you remember, after Trump left the presidency in the first term, the Saudis invested $2 billion in Trump's son-in-law's private firm. The main advisors in Saudi heavily advised against giving this amount to someone with little experience in investing amounts of that level, but the Crown Prince did it anyway. Many politicians, both Democrats and Republicans, were shocked that a member of Trump's family would be given a prize like this. It seemed like it would be illegal, but then it wasn't. I mean, Trump left office with an economy in shambles. Yes, it was the time of COVID, but still, Trump seemed to be the only one making any money. Now, move up to this past week. Trump is on his tour of the Middle East, which has been coined as the corruption tour. But why would the media and politicians be naming it that? Well, for one thing, Trump has been pushing his meme coin, a type of cryptocurrency named after him, the Trump coin. You can invest your money in this coin. However, since Trump owns most of the coin, it would be investing to make money for him. Well, didn't I hear a company called MGX just invested $2 billion into that coin? And who is that? It's a company out of Abu Dhabi. Why on earth would they do that? Are they going to make money at it? The way it's, all set up? Well, Trump is offering a free dinner with anyone who buys the most Trump coin. But this news and all others was overshadowed by, of course, the biggest news of the week. That is that the country of Qatar would be giving Trump a $400 million jet that they don't need anymore. And Trump would make it his new Air Force One. Now, when you see inside this thing, it's really something amazing. There's gold everywhere and lots of bathrooms. Looks like something an authoritarian king would have. And, well, that's who's giving it to Trump. But there's a few catches in this plane. First of all, the deal is that they would give it to the president to be used as the new Air Force One. However, after Trump is finished with his presidency, he would get to keep the plane for himself, which would be part of his presidential library. Now, as we know, Trump took a bunch of secret documents home with him after his first term in office, which you are not supposed to do. But this time, he's telling us ahead of time that he's going to get to keep that plane because it's a gift to him, or something like that. Of course, many are saying, oh, no. You can't take a gift like this because, there would be many strings attached. The Quatarians would be expecting you to treat them very favorably, an authoritarian regime. But Trump was like, but it's free. Why would I not accept something that's free? But here again, there's a catch. Air Force One is the most sophisticated plane in the sky. To take this flying palace, as it's been called, and retrofit it with all the stuff needed for Air Force One, it would cost as much as $500 billion. I'm sorry, 500 million to $1 billion. It would take nearly 3 years to do it. And at the end, Trump would get to keep it. And they are actually building a new Air Force One anyway. So why take on a plane the Qatarian government doesn't want anymore and strip it down and rebuild it just so the president can have a nice gift when he leaves office? Anyway, Trump also brought with him many of his billionaire buddies. According to Trump, they're all getting really big checks from the Saudis. I mean, not only is Trump getting a plane, but his friends are making money too. So it seems Trump is actually getting a lot from this trip. But for who? I mean, all of the countries in the world, why is Trump using his presidency so much on the Saudis? They're the same country where the terrorists that staged 9/11 came from. Okay, I'm just saying. Well, remember back after Trump left the White House before, many thought he would be, going to jail. All the companies from around the U.S. refused to have any connections with Trump. That included the Professional Golf Association. Trump's main thing is golf. Most of his real estate is golf clubs. But the PGA pulled all their competitions from his golf courses, all their sponsorships. I mean, he was the head of a violent coup, attempting to take over the government. The PGA didn't want to have that connected to their organization with his name. So Trump had all these golf courses, but no big competitions that nobody would go to. But then a nice soft mattress came into the mix for Trump to fall into: the Saudi government. They started their own golf competitions with big prize money, drawing some big names in golf. Where do you think they wanted to hold their golf competitions and tournaments? At the Trump golf clubs, of course. They offered hundreds of millions of dollars in prizes and put Trump back on the map of golf. But in the middle of all this, Trump got a massive deal to build a hotel. Where? In the middle of the capital of Saudi Arabia. Oh, and there's a deal for Trump to build another golf club in Qatar. It's valued at $5.5 billion. This just happened last month. Oh, and did he mention that Trump was offered to build a building in the UAE with what would have the highest roof pool in the world? So in Trump's first term, he had leaders of other countries rent out rooms of his hotels without ever showing up to stay in them, just using the presidency to make money for himself. Politicians were outraged. But now Trump has taken it to a whole new level. Remember, we were talking about the meme coin. Remember, if you invest in it, you can win a dinner with the president. So, of course, the officials of other countries like the UAE invest in that coin. Basically, you pay money to get access to the president of the United States. But this trip in the Middle East has taken things to a whole new level. I mean, someone whose name starts with T is about to make some really big money. Is this corruption at its highest level? I mean, a lot of leaders of countries do stuff just like this. However, I don't know if I ever heard this kind of thing coming from a U.S. president. But being in the Middle East, Trump seems to love Muslims. They give him money, a $400 million plane. Back in the U.S., Trump doesn't like Muslims or Hispanics. In fact, he wants to rid the country of them. But he's not having the best day of deporting the Muslims and the Hispanics. As we know, Trump has been sending immigrants back to where they came from as much as he can. And sometimes he sends them to a place they didn't even come from. He's sending people back with criminal records, some dating back 40 years. Some people that are illegally in the country, sometimes over 40 years. Also legal residents, even sometimes U.S. citizens born in the U.S. Anyone Trump's people doesn't like are possibly going to be thrown out of the country. No chance to argue their case or have any due process. Just caught, sent to the detention center, and then put on a plane to somewhere. Many times these deportations have been deemed illegal, even going as far as to being non-constitutional. Even the courts have been saying, you can't do this. But Trump was getting away with claiming that it was under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which means that any country the U.S. is at war with, the government can arrest, detain, and deport citizens from whatever that country is. It was last used in World War II for the Japanese people living in the U.S. The problem is that in the U.S., they're not at war with anyone right now. Now, the country of Venezuela, who Trump administration keeps saying the U.S. is at war with, in theory, of course, the government of Venezuela keeps saying, we're not at war with the U.S. And experts are saying, you kind of need a declaration of war to, be at war. But that is the reason Trump is using for deporting so many people, sometimes illegally and sometimes U.S. citizens. Now, of course, the Trump administration has been sued and sued and sued over and over for this, and they tend to lose every single court battle because, well, they can't really deport all these people legally without giving them due process. I mean, that's what makes America America. So they took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said to the Trump administration, why are you even bringing this to us when you know you are going to lose? The court said, we have long held that no person shall be removed from the United States without opportunity at some time to be heard. They affirmed again that migrants in the U.S. have the right to be heard in a court of law because being deported from the country without due process is illegal. The suit against Trump administration was actually brought about by two Venezuelan nationals who are being detained and facing deportation. As I understand it, they are being accused of being part of the gang 𝗡𝗲𝘄𝘀, which is the Trump administration who claimed is invading the U.S. to cause the U.S. harm. Now, just to be clear, the U.S. has not been able to prove that an invasion exists from this gang. But these Venezuelan immigrants are claiming they are legally allowed to be in the country and the government has no right to deport them. As for now, the U.S. Supreme Court believes that the Aliens Enemies Act is not a legal reason to deport these people. Well, 7 believe it and 2 do not. But those two people heavily tend to back Trump in any case, anything that he's involved in. So now Trump was not happy with the court's decision, of course. He has continually called the Supreme Court his Supreme Court, but now is saying that the Supreme Court won't allow us to get criminals out of our country. He said it's bad and a dangerous day in America. That the court is preventing him from exercising his executive authority. He said the Supreme Court of the United States is not allowing me to do what I was elected to do. But many others, especially those in Congress, have a different take on this, that it's bad and dangerous to not allow immigrants in the U.S. to be able to have a hearing in the courts, that this is clearly stated in the Constitution. And the issue about deporting a U.S. citizen is also being scrutinized. Trump believes he has the right to remove anyone he wishes, even if they were born in the country. But in order to do that, he would need to amend the Constitution, which is very, very difficult. Trump would also like to amend the Constitution to allow him to be in office for a 3rd term. But as many have said, that would open the door for Obama to run against him in the next election. Wouldn't that be something? In any case, for now, Trump cannot deport you without you having due process. You know, I have several Philippine friends who have children studying in the U.S. All the schools have warned them not to leave the country for now, that they might not be able to return for no reason. I guess this is the new USA. Pretty crazy, huh? But not as crazy as a story which has been floating around all the major news outlets. There is a TV show being floated from the head of the Department of Homeland Security, 𝗪cie. Now, at first, I thought this is just one of those things that the Trump administration will say just to get the focus off them onto something else. Say something outrageous to turn our focus away from something that's really bad going on. But supposedly, the head of the DHS is pushing a reality TV show in which there are immigrants pitted against each other in these games. And the winner of these games will get his or her U.S. citizenship, while the losers will be deported. Now, at first, the DHS spokesman denied the show ever happened or was ever being talked about. However, reporters started poking around. It turns out this show may be real, and it's being considered by the same production company that brought us the reality show Duck Dynasty. Supposedly, there is a 35-page program pitch put together in coordination with the head of DHS, 𝗪cie. Now, supposedly the show is in the beginning stages of the production process, but they do have a title, and it's going to be called The American. The contestants would ride a train, the train called The American, around the country and compete in contests that are specifically cultural to that area, such as log rolling in Wisconsin. Anyway, in the end, the grand finale would be the winner being sworn in as a U.S. citizen on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. It's been confirmed that 𝗏 is totally on board and supports this project. Supposedly, she wants to showcase what it means to be an American. the show would use immigrants already picked up and in the system and awaiting deportation. But doesn't this remind you of a couple other shows like The Hunger Games or maybe The Squid Games? I mean, can you imagine if this show becomes a reality? You think anyone would watch it? I got a feeling everyone would watch it. You know, many of the Trump administration officials, including Trump, are from reality TV shows. So I would guess this fits right in with the administration. And this is 𝗪cie𝗀𝗀 on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV. Thank you so much for joining us today. Well, we're going to have to discuss the situation in Israel. And I'm afraid it's not very good news. In one single day this past week, 150 people died and 300 since Thursday. 459 were injured in a major new Israeli offensive in Gaza. As per usual, the Israeli military says it needed to fire on Gaza to destroy Hamas and free the hostages. So, were any Hamas killed or were any hostages freed? What we do know is that many civilians died and a blockade has been set up to stop aid from coming into the area. The United Nations Secretary General said, "The situation for Palestinians in Gaza is beyond description, beyond atrocious, and beyond inhumane. A policy of siege and starvation makes a mockery of the international law. The blockade against humanitarian aid must end immediately. This is a moment for moral clarity and action." End quote. Now, the Israeli Defense Force said this offensive is something that is needed. It's part of Operation Gideon's Chariots, in which they plan to take over and expand its occupation in Gaza. It says that it must do this to ensure the safe release of the hostages. Now, of course, Donald Trump is in the Middle East making deals. However, he is there without a peace deal. It really seemed as if the war in Gaza was left out of the conversation, as well as the Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was described as being sidelined in Trump's tour. The Prime Minister said earlier this month that the population of Gaza would be completely displaced to the south as the military would expand its operations. This comes after many of the people of Gaza just been able to return, just trying to rebuild their homes. But as of now, the word Israelis are using to describe their operations is to conquer the territory. This announcement comes just after the milestone of 53,000 people being killed in the war. This is according to the Palestinian Authority. Most of these people killed are women and children. The recent bombings are being described as nowhere to run. You can't leave the area because you'll be hit. You can't stay in the area because you'll be hit. You just have to try and beat the odds. Hope you're not in the wrong place at the wrong time. Supposedly right now, food prices have skyrocketed and the aid distribution is not getting through. This means that people are getting desperate. What will they do when the food runs out entirely? Transportation costs are surging dramatically. The people of Gaza are falling back to where they were before, trying not to starve to death. Now, there's a new round of talks that have started. Supposedly, there are no preconditions from either side. All issues are on the table. In other words, they are talking, but without agreeing to a ceasefire or lifting the blockade. Palestinian officials said that the negotiations are centered around the release of some of the remaining hostages in return for some days of calmness. But on the ground, the bombs continue to fall. The IDF said that it would stop operations, and it won't until Hamas was no longer a threat and all the hostages were home. But of course, that's not going to happen anytime soon. Right now, Israeli troops are pouring into Gaza. Even tanks have been seen on the border. It's obvious the Palestinians are not going to give up, and the world around Israel is not going to abandon them. The U.S. nations continues to denounce the current new Israeli operations. They are saying it amounts to nothing more than ethnic cleansing. That this continued displacement of the population, which continues to keep happening, cannot continue. And the idea of the Palestinians being moved outside Gaza can never happen. The Prime Minister of Spain, Italy's foreign minister, called for immediate ceasefire. Germany's foreign minister said that this new offensive risks worsening the catastrophic humanitarian situation for Gaza's population and the remaining hostages. Israel has blocked food and other supplies into Gaza for more than 10 weeks now. Much of this new chaos started just after Trump left the Middle East. This is what was promised by Netanyahu. So it's not like they didn't know. There were announcements. People were told to leave their homes. However, many people are already homeless and in camps. There's no place to go. The problem is that on Saturday, Israel hit many towns where people are still staying in their homes. They even included hitting the refugee camps where people were staying that had lost their homes. You start to see the photos coming out of Gaza. You start to understand how dire things have gotten there. According to a British surgeon, the children that come into the surgical area are incredibly thin. They are youngsters. Teeth have fallen out. Many of them have many burns on their bodies, and because of the extreme malnutrition, infection is very easy to set in. Trump has said he wanted to end the war. However, during his visit to the Middle East, he did not stop to Israel. In fact, many have said he purposely didn't even bother including Netanyahu in his trip at all. His was about him and the deals he was making with that part of the world. He did say, though, that he has concepts for Gaza. He wants to turn it into a freedom zone. He said, let the United States get involved and turn it into a freedom zone. Of course, many have asked, what exactly is a freedom zone? And what does that really do for the Palestinians? As you remember, Trump said he wanted to move the people of Gaza out of the region and build those nice hotels there, making it something called the Riviera of the Middle East, with resorts, maybe a golf course. That idea was immediately rejected by the Palestinians and the United Nations, a lot saying the phrase, "Are you kidding me?" Israel seemed to like the idea, but as of now, the U.S. and Israel seem to be drifting apart slightly. They do not seem to agree on these massive military offenses that seem to only be killing civilians. When things like this happens, it's easy to criticize the U.S. because they are the ones supplying the weaponry that kills all these women and children. Also this week, the presidents of Qatar, Egypt, and Palestine's president, they attended a summit in Iraq, of all places. They released a statement that urged the international community to assume their moral and legal responsibilities to pressure for the end to the bloodshed and endure the unhindered entry of urgent humanitarian aid to all the areas in need in Gaza. They also commented on the forced migration and displacement of the Gazan people, saying it's a grave violation of the principles of international law and international humanitarian law, a crime against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and there's that word again. They believe something like 436,000 people have been forcibly displaced since this past March. And besides all this, the Israelis have denied all humanitarian aid from the outside, including food, medical supplies, and other supplies for around 2 million Palestinians. Here again, the IDF is saying that by stopping this aid from coming in, they are pressuring the Hamas to free the hostages. But many international organizations are saying that this is illegal to use starvation as a weapon of war, especially when it's geared toward innocent civilians, which it is. There's a study out this week that soon the Palestinians will reach the stage of famine, most severe hunger crisis. Like I said, in the beginning, out of Gaza, it's not getting good, it's getting worse. The people Israel wants to kill, Hamas, many of them are no longer in Gaza. As far as the hostages, who can really say who's alive and who's dead? The only thing we know for sure is that the people of Gaza, for the most part, had nothing to do with this conflict, are dying little by little. A race of people are disappearing, and for what reason? For security? Or so that some politicians can stay in power? This is the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio, Radio Bandito TV. Thank you so much for joining us today on the show. We're talking about stories going on around the world. Well, the P. Diddy trial is off and running, with Diddy's girlfriend Cassie Ventura taking the stand this past week. As we know, the rapper and mega billionaire entrepreneur P. Diddy is on trial for, well, just about everything. Racketeering, sex trafficking, prostitution, illegal arms, illegal drugs, etc., etc. So his ex-girlfriend, who's pregnant, by the way, was on the stand for maybe 20 hours total, answering questions about how he physically and sexually abused her and how he used violence and blackmail to make her participate in drug-fueled sex parties known as freak-offs. This insane lifestyle had been going on for maybe 10 years now. Cassie dropped all the cases she had against P. Diddy as she got an 8-figure financial settlement, which the defense brought up a few times. Maybe she's doing this for the money, which she already got. They pointed out that Diddy was a jealous man, had violent tendencies with a drug problem, but he was not a criminal kingpin as the prosecution makes him out to be. The defense continued to say that the women in question that P. Diddy abused all legally consented to the requests and acts that P. Diddy wanted, that he didn't make them do it. They did it to please this megastar. But there's just so much evidence. But even with all the evidence against him, he has pleaded not guilty and has maintained he did nothing wrong. And it's just people trying to get rich off of him. But if he is found guilty of the list of charges, he could end up in prison for the rest of his life. So, as this week winded down, Dawn Richard took the stand, who is a former member of the group Dainty Kane. It's one of P. Diddy's groups, but that testimony just started. Here's what we know so far this week. Now, this is just one small part of the case against Diddy. Cassie Ventura, his ex, testified that Diddy raped her after a dinner they had in August of 2018, but previously testified that it was actually September 2018. So the defense pressed her on the discrepancies in the dates. Also, what she thought about Diddy's state of mind. They asked her, "Did you tell the police that he was acting anxious and strangely?" She replied, "I believe so." They asked, "And you told the prosecutors that you thought his behavior might be attributed to his bipolar disorder, right?" She answered, "Yeah." "You also told the prosecutors that you did not think that Mr. Diddy was in his right mind because he did not respond to you when you told him to stop. Is that correct?" "Yep," she answered. So what does this all mean? It seems as if the defense is trying to push the idea that he was not in his right mind, that he was suffering from a psychological problem, and that's what made him rape her. But then, later she had sex with Diddy again on September 27th. And this is where it gets kind of confusing. You see, her now husband texted her during that episode, and she told him that that was the time that he raped her. But on the stand, she said that that was not the time that he raped her. That was just, some regular sex. By the way, her husband was asked to leave the courtroom at that time because he will have to testify later about this same subject. Now, let me just say at this point that all these people are rich, like rich, rich. She claims she was raped by Diddy, yet had sex with him later, which was not rape. She sued, got a huge settlement, somewhere around $20 million. She also sued the hotel that Diddy was seen on camera dragging her and punching her. That was March of 2016. She asked for $10 million on that one. Like I said, there are so many parts to this drama. The attorney for the prosecution later asked her if she would give back the $20 million if she never had to do the freak-offs. She burst into tears, said, I'd give the money back if I never have to have those freak-offs. She said that she does not have a financial stake in the outcome of this trial. Okay, well, she's already got the money, so why should she? And that she still has feelings for Diddy, did not hate him. She said, I don't hate him. Prosecutor said, do you still love him? She said, I have love for the past and what it was. But then things took a different turn as she started explaining her PTSD caused by Diddy's physical abuse. She said her career suffered and she couldn't do many of the things she wanted to do because of so many freak-offs. Supposedly, this is when he beat her in the hotel in 2016 because she left a freak-off before it was over. By the way, in case you don't know what a freak-off is, well, it's what they call these strange sex parties that Diddy put together. He would hire commercial sex workers and they would have sex with his friends or people that he worked with. Sometimes they would go on for days. Performance-enhancing drugs were used and IVs to keep the participants going. He would videotape these events. Remember, when the FBI raided his home, they found 1,000 bottles of baby oil. Diddy allegedly directed the acts or performances just for himself to watch. People wore masks and costumes. It was a real scene, something kind of hard to imagine. The problem was that sometimes people were coerced, even forced to participate in these parties against their will. He would fly people across state lines to bring them to the parties, and this is where you get in the allegations of sex trafficking. Young girls thinking that he was going to give them a big break in the music business, but they would end up doing this. Now, a lot of this has come out in the trial in great detail, which I can't really say here on the show, but reading through the transcripts, wow, some of what they had to do, stuff you would never think of. And this is not all. Diddy would film these things, later use them as blackmail to the girls if they ever tried to leave him or tell anyone. And if they didn't perform the acts that he wanted, they might get, smacked around a little. Now, you start to understand why this case is so big and why Diddy is being held without bail. Also, you have to understand, Diddy is worth like $1 billion. He is one of the top performers in the music industry. People praise this guy. They worship this guy. They all thought he was going to make them a star. Imagine to have that kind of power over people, to think you are so rich and so powerful that no one can ever touch you. But if you look at people like P. Diddy and Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, eventually it all comes crashing down. The problem is that back when they were doing this, you could actually kind of get away with it. But in 2025, well, you're looking at spending the rest of your life in jail, no matter how much money or power you have. I know there are a lot of people saying he didn't do it, and it's just people trying to make some money off suing him. The problem is that if it's 1 or 2 or even 3, that could be true, but in this case, there are many. And the stories are going to go down in entertainment history as some of the strangest things you could possibly ever imagine. I know he pleaded not guilty, but wow, the evidence is overwhelming. So we will wait and see if that $1 billion can fix this mountain of a problem for Diddy. Because once you're in jail, that $1 billion is not worth so much anymore. And this is Eric Lecain here on The Jam, talking about news going around the world. Okay, here's a story that I can't ignore this week, mostly because so many people have asked me about it. The tariffs. Now, what's is the news on tariffs? Well, it's pretty much changes from day to day. In other words, if you watch the World News Jam tomorrow, everything might have changed. Now, last time we talked about this, I believe the China tariff had moved to 145%, a number that's realistically so outrageous it couldn't be real. And at the same time, China started its own tariffs by taxing everything coming into China from the USA. So, as the world economy begins to spin out of control, President Trump pulled out the pause card again, saying that we will pause the tariffs for 90 days. This is while all the countries try to make deals with the U.S. Anybody could stop in, make a deal. Trump's administration said 90 deals in 90 days. But of course, the question remained, what countries are actually making deals? For some reason, the Trump people can never tell us this, only to say that the UK made a big deal, a deal that turned out to be mostly symbolic. In any case, when Trump returned from his trip on Friday to the U.S., he made a statement in which he said that his people, just didn't have the time to meet all the countries so eager to make a deal. So instead, they would send out letters telling the countries what their deals would be. He said that he thought the U.S. would be very fair. But if you're going to deal with the U.S., you're going to do trade with the U.S., Trump said, you will have to pay. So instead of all these new deals the Trump administration was supposedly making, it's now just sending a letter that you will get in the mail. Now, the current tariff on most countries is 10%. Again, 90 days. This is because the previous tariffs didn't make much sense to anybody. That was based on the differences in the amounts of the goods the U.S. sold your country and how many goods they sold to the U.S. Of course, countries like Bangladesh got the worst into that deal. I mean, Bangladesh doesn't really buy that much from the U.S., so their tariffs were crazy high on one of the poorest countries in the world. So nearly everyone went to 10% around the world, giving them time to make a deal. But it seems like not many deals got made. One thing it did do was create a whirlwind of uncertainty. Companies were not sure if anything would be on the shelf for people to buy after August. But one thing is for sure, that the prices of things has already gone up. It's easy to see. In fact, some of the stores in the U.S. are already telling the tariffs, giving you the tariff numbers on what you're buying. So how did we get here? Let's go back to April 2nd, Liberation Day. Trump's people wrote down some numbers which didn't make sense to anybody, so stocks fell off a cliff and everyone got nervous. It looked like the U.S. economy had a very dark future. So Trump pulled out the pause button and stocks rose a little bit. Trump claimed this was what was exactly supposed to happen. So now he can bargain with people. He can leverage, make a bunch of deals. Of course, that didn't exactly turn out the way it was supposed to. Places like China said, we don't need the U.S. We will make new deals with other countries. And they did. So what Trump has done now is he's made a whole new set of numbers and is sending them in the regular mail to the different countries. But now, what is that going to mean? What will we need to sit on the edge of our seats waiting to see what these new tariffs will be? What will the Philippines have to pay? That's what I want to know. In the meantime, Trump told Walmart, who has warned shoppers that prices are going to go up soon, to eat the tariffs. In other words, Walmart should not pass along the cost to the consumer. But that doesn't sound like something Walmart's going to do. Walmart CEO said, we have always worked to keep our prices as low as possible, and we won't stop. We'll keep prices as low as we can for as long as we can, given the reality of the small retail margins. Walmart said that prices will increase at the end of May and will increase much, much more in June. This is mostly because of a huge portion of things sold at Walmart come from China. Now, Trump dropped the tariff from 145% on China down to 30%, but Trump threatened China that if they don't make a deal he thinks is fair, then the current ridiculously high tariffs could go up substantially. Now, Is this one of the times Trump is really going to do this, or is he bluffing again? But the big issue is not going to be in the plastic trash cans or the pickleball rackets. It's going to be the cost of food and fuel. The U.S. doesn't even grow coffee beans except in a small amount of Hawaii. What about the countries like Colombia, Costa Rica, Peru? Large amounts of food products come out of those countries. But as most people can already see, the price of fruits and vegetables has already started to rise in the U.S. And, well, the other big concern is Christmas. Companies usually start buying for Christmas in June. But no one can tell what the market will be like in June or even 3 months from June. I mean, Trump is saying maybe kids should only get $2 instead of 30, to which many people said, 30? Who gives their kids $30 at Christmas? But Trump is saying, just tough it out. Pay a little more. But didn't he tell Americans that he would bring down the cost of everything on day one? Well, that obviously is not going to happen. Right now, Apple is saying that the iPhone 17 will move from $799 to $1,000. Nintendo said that the Switch will go from $450 to $600. These are some pretty big numbers. Another issue is going to be child care products, strollers, clothes, car seats, baby formula. Experts say that around 90% of those products are produced in China. I mean, even if the prices shoot up on these items, some of us will have to buy them whether you want to or not. Food and baby gear are things the U.S. has to buy. But what about the other stuff? The rest of the $438 billion worth of stuff China sells to the U.S.? What if Americans will put off buying that stuff and China moves its non-essentials to other places, to other countries? What will happen to the world economy? Like I said, what will happen in the Philippines? What kind of deal can we get here? Trump thought that countries would bow to him, that everyone needed the U.S. so bad that they would do anything to have a trade deal. I guess the question is, what if Trump was wrong? What if countries don't need the U.S. like we thought? Could the world survive without the U.S., or rather, could the U.S. survive without the world? I'm sure by next week we will have a whole new story on tariffs and probably know even less about the future. This is Lecain on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV. Talking about news going on around the world. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Please tune in again next week for more interesting stories and news going on around the world. Until then, everybody be safe out there, and we will see you again next week.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Happy birthday, RJ!
Happy birthday.